robust and comprehensive package of potential sanctions. And we have worked in very close coordination with our friends from the United Kingdom, the United States and Canada. And let me say that in these weeks, we have built a unity of purpose that is truly remarkable, both within the European Union and with our partners. In case of a Russian aggression, Europe's reaction will be swift and robust. And we're not just talking about freezing assets and banning travel for Russian individuals. Russia's strategic interest is to diversify its economy, its one-sided economy, and to close its current gaps. But for this, they need technologies in which we have a global leadership, high-tech components of which Russia is almost entirely dependent on us. So our sanctions can bite very hard, and the Kremlin knows this as well. And on another topic, we are also ready. In case that the Russian leadership decides to weaponize the energy issue. You know, we see at a time of high demand that Gazprom is restricting its gas supplies to Europe. We see a 10-year low in storage by Gazprom. We see no sales on the spot market. This is a strange behavior for a company that in times of skyrocketing demand and prices, they are not trying to maximize their profits. And this behavior has already damaged Russia's credibility as a reliable energy supplier. We are since weeks in talks with a number of countries that are ready to step up their exports of liquefied natural gas to the European Union. And this resulted now in January in record deliveries of LNG gas, more than 120 vessels, that is the equivalent of 10 billion cubic meters of LNG. And on top, we've done our homework. Since the annexation of Crimea, we have increased the number of LNG terminals in the European Union. We have reinforced our pan-European pipeline and electricity interconnector network. And the good part in this story is that these investments in infrastructure we have done will in future be the backbone for the possibility to supply with green hydrogen. So they are future-proof. And now we have, during the last weeks, looked into all possible disruption scenarios in case Russia decides to partially or completely disrupt gas supplies to the European Union. And I can say today that our models show, with all the measures we have taken, that we are now on the safe side for this winter. On top of this, we have also developed with a number of member states a new set of emergency measures which we could trigger in case of complete disruptions. But one of the main lessons we have already learned from this crisis, honourable members, is that we must diversify our energy sources and we must get rid of the dependency of Russian gas. We must heavily invest in renewables. Our alternative are renewables, because though renewables are clean and good for the climate, but they are also homegrown and good for our independence. That's where our future lies. Honourable members, this is a crisis that has been created by Moscow. We have not chosen confrontation. We are hoping for the best, but we are prepared for the worst. We now have two distinct futures ahead of us. In one, the Kremlin decides to wage war against Ukraine with massive human costs, something we thought we had left behind after the tragedies of the 20th century. Moscow's relation with us would be severely damaged. Tough sanctions would kick in with dire consequences on the Russian economy and its prospect of modernization. But another future is possible. A future in which Russia and Europe cooperate on their shared interests. A future where free countries work together in peace. A future of prosperity built on the respect of the fundamental principles that are enshrined in the UN Charter and in the European security architecture since the Helsinki Final Act. This is my aspiration, and I'm sure the Russian people share this aspiration too. It's now up to the Kremlin to decide. But whatever path they decide to take, we will stand our ground. Europe will be united on the side of Ukraine, on the side of peace, and on the side of Europe's people. Long live Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President von der Leyen. I invite now High Representative Josep Borrell to take the floor.
Señora Presidenta del Parlamento Europeo, señor Presidente del Consejo Europeo, señora Presidenta de la Comisión, señoras y señores diputados y diputadas. Lo que ocurra en Ucrania marcará el futuro de la humanidad. Todos los seres humanos deberían estar preocupados por lo que allí ocurra, porque si de nuevo se impone la ley del más fuerte y un país puede amenazar a otro y puede atacarlo y desagregarlo territorialmente, echaremos marcha atrás en la historia. El gran éxito de la Unión Europea es precisamente el haber renunciado a la guerra como forma de resolver los conflictos. Y por eso tenemos que estar con Ucrania, tratando de prevenir una guerra en nuestras fronteras. Y eso forma parte fundamental de lo que llamamos política común de seguridad y defensa, que tengo el honor de intentar desarrollar. Y la presencia aquí hoy en este Pleno de las instituciones de la Unión, Consejo Europeo, con su presidente, la Comisión Europea, con su presidenta, y el Consejo, al que tengo el honor de representar y presidir sus formaciones de Asuntos Exteriores y de Defensa, marca la unidad europea frente a la posible agresión de Rusia contra Ucrania. Y esta unidad se ha hecho más fuerte y patente en estos días. Y creo que es una de las grandes consecuencias positivas de esta crisis. Ha habido una aproximación común y todos los Estados europeos han respondido unánimemente a una respuesta que deberá concretarse en lo que llamamos sanciones o medidas coercitivas según el Tratado. Sanciones que deberá aprobar el Consejo bajo la propuesta del alto representante y que habrán sido elaboradas con la inestimable cooperación de la Comisión Europea para medir cuáles son sus costes y sus consecuencias, y ciertamente bajo la dirección política del Consejo Europeo. Y eso ocurrirá si Rusia agrede a Ucrania. Pero déjeme que insista en el aspecto fundamental de nuestra Unión, que es la consecuencia más positiva de esta crisis. Una crisis que se ha basado en la amenaza a la integridad territorial de un Estado, una crisis que afecta a la estructura de seguridad en Europa, que no puede ser puesta en cuestión a través de amenazas, y una crisis que afecta al derecho de cada Estado soberano a escoger libremente sus estructuras de seguridad y sus relaciones internacionales. Allow me to talk about a little bit which has been the role of the European diplomacy in these events. It has been said that Europe was missing in action. We have heard that the European is missing in actions and things are happening without our presence, without our participation, led by the United States, who are negotiating over our head. I think that we have to respond to this criticism, which seems at all unfounded, by several reasons. First, because the member states of the Union have consistently debating the issue of security in Europe and Ukraine, and we have achieved a remarkable unity. Because several member states, France and Germany, have taken a number of political initiatives to promote a peaceful settlement of the crisis, and these initiatives have been carried in coherence with the positions of the Union and in conditions of great transparency. And third, because Russia deliberately tried to ignore the existence of the European Union by sending letters only to the United States and NATO in December, considering that we are completely irrelevant and has nothing to say about the security issues in Europe. For Moscow, the security in Europe is being defined in Washington. Later, when they will notice that despite this dismissive attitude, nothing was going on, Minister Lavrov finally decided to send a letter to the 27 member states that he had ignored until now. Why such a U-turn on the Russian position? For two reasons. First, because they realized that the European front was not cracked and the Atlantic solidarity was very strong. So he tried a maneuver which was to send letters to the 27 member states hoping to have 27 different answers. But in this case, Mr. Lavrov didn't succeed because we sent him a single letter, saving him the time to read 27 letters, all of them equal. Just one letter representing the position of the European Union on behalf of the 27 member states. And this is a good example of how we Europeans can work together, and together with our allies, with the US and other like-minded countries, with which we have had a continuous and very much positive coordination. So we have been present, participating on the negotiations, if we can call them negotiations, at least conversations, until now. So what we can envisage next? Well, we don't know. Nobody knows. There are encouraging signs, but also very much worrisome events, like the vote in the Duma asking Putin to recognize the independence of the two, let's say, republics in the Donbass. We don't know what Putin is going to do, but what is clear is that we have to continue offering both things at the same time. The will to negotiate, be ready to participate in talks because, yes, Russia has also security concerns that has to be taken into consideration, and on the other hand, to prepare our capacity to respond, our dissuasion tools, sanctions, as the President of the Commission and the President of the Council have been referring to. On that, we have been working, and on that, we are ready to act. But most of all, we are ready to continue negotiations, talk, in order to look for a diplomatic solution to the worst crisis that Europe is living since the end of the Cold War. And I repeat again, this crisis not only affects Ukrainians, not only the Europeans, it affects the direction of humankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the High Representative. We will now do a round of starting with the political groups, and not many colleagues who will take the floor in this important debate, starting with the chair of the European People's Party Group, Manfred Weber.
Präsident Metsola, Präsident von der Leyen, Präsident Michel, Vice President Borrell. Gut, dass Sie alle da sind. Es ist zunächst mal wichtig, dass wir als Europäer in diesem Moment gemeinsam die Lage beurteilen und heute diskutieren. In diesen Tagen geht es um ein Grundversprechen, um das Grundversprechen der Europäischen Union, nämlich das Grundversprechen nach Frieden. Die Angst der Ukrainer können wir uns wahrscheinlich kaum vorstellen, die Sorge, die dort derzeit herrscht. Aber es geht nicht nur um die Ukraine, es geht eben um uns. Frieden sichern. Die erste Frage, die wir uns stellen müssen, ist, um was geht es eigentlich in diesem Konflikt? Manche versuchen zu sagen, es ging hier um die NATO-Osterweiterung, es ging hier um Sicherheitsinteressen. Ich glaube das nicht. In den 80er Jahren sind Menschen in Danzig auf die Straße gegangen, haben für Freiheit und Demokratie gekämpft. Dann Ende der 80er Jahre in
End of the
Dresden,
80s,
im
in
Baltikum,
Dresden,
in Budapest,
in the Baltic
der
countries,
Fall des
in
Eisernen
Budapest,
Vorhangs, der Zusammenbruch des Kommunismus.
and the fall of the Iron Curtain, the fall of
Der
communism,
Maidan in Kiew,
and then
wo
Maidan
Menschen
in
für
Kiev,
Freiheit und
when people
Demokratie gekämpft haben und
fought
auch
for
gestorben
freedom of
sind.
democracy,
Und
and
jetzt
also
vor wenigen
died.
Jahren in
And now, some years ago,
Minsk,
in
in
Minsk,
Belarus, wo
in
Menschen
Belarus,
für diese Idee auf
when
die Straße
people
gegangen sind.
went onto the streets for
Die
these
Idee der
ideas,
Freiheit
the idea
gewinnt.
of peace
Sie geht
wins
Schritt für Schritt unaufhaltsam
step by
nach
step.
vorne.
It
Ich war
moves
selbst
ahead.
am Maidan im Jahr
I was in
2014
Maidan
mit den
myself
jungen
in
Menschen dort
2014. I spoke
gesprochen.
with young people
Deswegen
there.
muss für uns Europäer eines klar sein.
One
Wir
thing must be
stehen
clear
an
for
der
us
Seite
Europeans.
der Menschen,
We are
die
on
für
the
Freiheit
side
und
of people
Demokratie
who
eintreten.
are for
Es ist
peace and
vielleicht wieder
democracy.
ein Moment, wo wir sagen
It's
müssen,
another
es geht
moment,
um unsere
perhaps, where
Grundwerte,
it's
und
about
wir
our
werden sie
fundamental
verteidigen,
values,
whatever
and
it takes.
we will defend them
Es ist,
whatever it
liebe
takes.
Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
Colleagues,
die größte Bedrohung für
the
Putin
greatest threat.
nicht die NATO-Truppen, sondern ein freies, demokratisches Ukraine. Das ist die größte Bedrohung.
that's the biggest threat for
Zweite
Putin
Frage,
is a
die wir
free,
beantworten
democratic
müssen, ist,
Ukraine. The
was
second
ist,
question we must answer
unsere Aufgabe
is,
jetzt?
what is our
Wie können
task?
wir Frieden sichern?
How can we ensure
Putin
peace?
versteht nur die Sprache der
Putin
Macht.
only understands the
Heute
language
heißt
of
das,
power.
wir brauchen eine klare
And it means
Rechnung, die wir
we
ihm
need
präsentieren. Die
a clear
Kosten
bill
sind
we
hoch.
can give him. The
Für meine
costs are
politische
high.
Partei, für die Europäische
For
Volkspartei,
my political
kann
party,
ich
the
klarstellen, dass
EPP, I
Nord
can
Stream 2
ensure,
nicht ans
I can
Netz
assure
gehen kann, sollte es
that
zur Eskalation kommen.
Nord
Der Ausschluss von russischen
Stream
Banken
2
vom
won't go ahead if
internationalen
there's
Finanzmarkt
violence,
ist für uns
the exclusion of Russian
unvermeidlich.
banks from
Und
the European,
die
from the
bereits von der
international
Kommissionspräsidentin
financial system is
angekündigte
necessary. And
Beschränkungen von
the
Lieferung von
limitation
a corto plazo en la creación de reservas estratégicas y compras conjuntas de gas, y continuemos liderando como destino final la construcción de un nuevo orden mundial energético cimentado en las energías renovables y socialmente justo. Es el momento para la nueva agresión contra Ucrania tendrá enormes consecuencias para Rusia. Hasta que una guerra empieza, se puede evitar. El rechazo a la guerra y la voluntad de construir la paz es la base esencial del proyecto europeo. No podemos renunciar a lo más admirable que hemos conquistado, la libertad y la democracia que han dignificado la vida de millones de seres humanos. El presidente Zelensky también debe mantener su compromiso con la senda de la democracia, erradicar la corrupción, reformar el poder judicial y consolidar las instituciones democráticas son la mejor arma frente a Rusia, porque el único temor de Putin es que la democracia y nuestro modelo social lleguen a la Plaza Roja de Moscú. Todos debemos tener algo claro, y es que vencer con la fuerza no es convencer, y en la vida hay que convencer. Putin no convencerá, porque convencer significa persuadir, y para persuadir necesita algo que le falta en este momento: necesita razón y derecho. Por lo tanto, nos queda mucho trabajo por hacer. Ucrania puede estar segura que la familia socialdemócrata estará a su lado. El mayor homenaje que podemos rendir a las personas que perdieron la vida en la plaza de Maidán y en el valle de Donbass es nuestro compromiso con un vecindario estable, próspero y democrático. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ms. García Pérez. And now, on behalf of the Renew Group, Stéphane Séjourné.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Président du Conseil, Madame la Présidente de la Commission. Inédite et des aides aux États qui seraient les plus impactés par une telle décision. Nous devons être prêts à agir immédiatement. Cette fois, l'Europe doit démontrer que sa puissance économique est au service de ses intérêts géopolitiques. Enfin, nous devons agir aussi et assurer à long terme la sécurité de notre continent. Soyons lucides. C'est la force d'attraction de notre modèle qui pose problème à Poutine. C'est l'aspiration européenne de l'Ukraine qui est vue comme une menace aujourd'hui. Certaines fois, quand j'écoute certains Européens, j'ai l'impression que nous sommes les seuls à ne pas voir ce que nous sommes. Nous sommes une puissance en devenir, une puissance économique, sociale, attractive, mais surtout une puissance démocratique. Chers collègues, l'unité européenne est clé dans ce conflit. Ni les élections nationales, ni les tentatives de déstabilisation, ni l'allégeance de certaines forces politiques au Kremlin ne doivent mettre en péril notre unité européenne pour la paix, pour l'Ukraine, pour nos valeurs et pour nos concitoyens.
Merci, Monsieur Séjourné. On behalf of the Green Group, I now give the floor to Ska Keller.
Thank you. Ukraine is under threat. A country that, just as any other country, wants to decide on its own future, but is bullied by its big neighbor. But this is not just a threat to Ukraine. It's also an attack on the basic idea of how states relate to each other. It's a threat to international rules and to European security. And it saddens me profoundly that we have to debate this dangerous development in our eastern neighbourhood today. This European Parliament was born out of the devastating experience of war and violence. The EU was built as a peace project and a model of democratic cooperation. President Putin's nationalist and imperial course of action and suppression runs contrary to the mere idea of our common union. Putin's actions therefore challenge us as Europeans. And we, as members of this Parliament, carry a historic responsibility to stand up and clearly condemn Russia's threat of aggression. As EU, as its Parliament, we stand united against the Russian threat and in full support with Ukraine. The people of Ukraine have our support for choosing their own path, for living in peace and for undertaking reforms that will transform their country for the better. We need to be prepared for sanctions against individuals, entities and sectors in Russia. I am talking, for example, about freezing assets, about entry bans, and yes, I am also talking about Nord Stream 2. This pipeline must be part of our common sanction regime. And yes, sanctions have repercussions also for ourselves, but we must act in face of an aggression. As Union, we need to reduce our dependencies on Russia, especially when it comes to energy. We have the technologies to do so, and we have ample supplies of sun and wind. What energy we use is a geostrategic decision, and we need to make the right one. Let's not forget that the Ukrainian people have suffered greatly already because of the Russian aggression going on for years in eastern Ukraine. Almost 15,000 people have died. More than 1 million Ukrainians had to flee their homes. Conflicts can only be solved by diplomatic means. Russia must withdraw its troops and end the threat of invasion. It must return to the table of frank and peaceful negotiations. Negotiations that must be based on international law, mutual respect, and a common vision for peace on our common European continent. This is a key moment for international peace, stability, and security. Now is our time to show through words and through actions that we stand united as one and that the people of Ukraine can count on us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Keller, I give the floor now to Marco Zanni on behalf of the ID Group. Prego.
Grazie Presidente, Presidente von der Leyen, Presidente Michel. Credo che oggi il messaggio che le istituzioni europee devono dare al popolo ucraino è un messaggio di solidarietà e non possiamo lasciare spazio alle ambiguità che molto spesso nel passato e anche nelle discussioni recenti l'Europa e l'Occidente ha dato su questa questione. Io ho ascoltato con attenzione quanto detto dalla Presidente von der Leyen, quanto detto dal Presidente Michel, dall'alto rappresentante Borrell e non concordo sull'ottimismo di come ha agito l'Europa in questa situazione. Rimane e rimangono ancora molte ambiguità nell'approccio che mettiamo sul campo davanti alla questione russa e alle minacce che il regime di Putin oggi pone ai nostri confini. Dobbiamo fermamente e convintamente far capire all'Ucraina che l'Europa è pronta a tutto per proteggere la sua integrità territoriale e la sua libertà. E questi sono principi su cui non possiamo transigere e dobbiamo analizzare con attenzione anche quali sono stati i nostri errori e il perché di questa ambiguità, del fatto che l'Europa non sia stata in grado di dare di fronte a questa crisi un messaggio unitario e concreto e chiaramente ci sono stati degli errori, abbiamo parlato delle dipendenze che i nostri paesi, i nostri Stati membri hanno dal regime russo, ma queste situazioni non sono nuove, non le abbiamo scoperte oggi, sono situazioni che conosciamo da anni e niente abbiamo fatto per ridurre questa dipendenza e l'ambiguità è un problema perché è vero che le dinamiche dei regimi dittatoriali sono difficili da capire per noi che apparteniamo a paesi liberi, ma è altrettanto vero che siamo in grado di comprendere benissimo che le nostre debolezze e le nostre ambiguità danno spazio alle minacce, danno spazio e potere a chi vuole portare la guerra ai nostri confini. È triste constatare, credo, che a 20 anni dall'ultima guerra che abbiamo vissuto all'interno all'interno
some
dell'Europa,
20
quella in
years now
Kosovo
since the
e quella
last
nei
war that we
Balcani,
experienced
stirino
here in
ancora
Europe, in the
venti
Kosovo and in
di
the
guerra
Balkans.
ai nostri confini, e questo è un
We
insuccesso di
we
tutti, è
can
un
feel
insuccesso
the
dell'Europa,
winds
è
of
un
war on
insuccesso
our borders.
dell'Occidente.
And this
Per
is,
questo credo
this
che
20 years without war has been a success of the
quello
West.
che dobbiamo
So what
evitare oggi
clearly
è
we
una
need to
guerra,
avoid at this time
un'escalation che
is
porti a
a
un
war or
conflitto
an
militare
escalation
che
that would
nessuno
lead to
vuole
military
e che
conflict.
nessuno oggi
No one
è in grado
wants
di
this.
affrontare.
And
Ma
no
con
one is
fermezza
in a
dobbiamo
position
correggere
to,
gli errori che abbiamo fatto in
deal
Europa e
with
dobbiamo
this,
avere
but we
anche
must
il coraggio di dire che
have
questa
the courage
ambiguità
to
è ben
correct
chiara,
the
ma molto
mistakes that
spesso
we
la
have made, and
nascondiamo
that this
sotto il tappeto,
ambiguity
come
is
il
quite
fatto
clear,
che il primo
even though we
lobbista di
often
Putin in
just
Europa
sweep it
purtroppo
under
sia un
the
ex capo di
carpet. We
governo
know,
del
of
paese
course,
più
that
importante
Putin
di
is
quest'Unione
the
Europea.
previous
Credo che ci sia spazio ancora per lavorare su una soluzione pacifica, non transigendo sui nostri principi, che ci sia spazio per riportare indietro le lancette, che ci sia spazio per far sì e per mostrare che l'Occidente è unito, ma l'Europa deve lasciare indietro le sue ambiguità, deve dare un messaggio di compattezza con gli alleati occidentali e insieme nel framework della NATO dobbiamo risolvere questa situazione, altrimenti la nostra ambiguità sarà sempre una debolezza e non riusciremo mai ad essere protagonisti in maniera positiva nella risoluzione dei conflitti e nella tutela delle libertà di cui dovremmo essere forieri. Grazie.
I give the floor now on behalf of the ECR group to Mr. Legutko.
Thank you, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, when in 2008 the Russian army invaded Georgia, Poland's President Lech Kaczynski gathered political leaders from Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania in Tbilisi, and at a public meeting he said these memorable words: "Today it is Georgia, tomorrow Ukraine, then the Baltic states, and in the future maybe Poland." Well, unfortunately, these words are not only memorable, but they sound prophetic too. But there is a discrepancy between East European and West European political sensibilities. For most East Europeans, Russian imperialism is a fact that has determined and continues to determine their very existence. For the West Europeans, it is simply news in the media, sometimes sensational and exciting, but generally it is a rather tedious story in a far-off land, presumably made up by some political fantasists. To make the matter worse, Russia has become an object of deep attraction for many Europeans and additionally an engaging partner in power politics, also in economic relations, not to mention the notorious Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And the fact that former chancellors of Germany and Austria, former prime ministers of France and Finland have been working for Russian businesses, were employed by Russian businesses, is meaningful. These gentlemen, and many others too, also ladies, let me add, are not mavericks, but they represent what is typical of a large segment of European political establishment. To call a spade, Europe is a weak link in the line of defense against Russian imperialism. No wonder that Putin likes to humiliate the European politicians and has been quite successful in this. Those politicians desire to accommodate Russia and are keen on conducting business as usual with her. And this is the reason why they de facto accepted the annexation of the Crimea. Well, recent signals from Europe and also from outside Europe have been rather mixed, but there is a lot of reassuring talk about the hardening of the European position vis-à-vis Russia. We've heard a lot of tough words today, really a significant EU pep talk. But how hard this position has really become, not in words, but in deeds, we will know in the weeks and months to come.
I give the floor next on behalf of the Left Group to Martin Schildewan.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Europa blickt in den Abgrund eines Krieges zwischen Russland und der Ukraine, dessen Preis zuallererst die Zivilbevölkerung zu zahlen hätte. Und der Schlüssel zur Überwindung dieser Krise, die die gesamte europäische Friedensordnung in Frage stellt und bedroht, lag von Anfang an in Diplomatie, in Deeskalation und in beidseitiger verbaler und militärischer Abrüstung. Und das gilt nicht nur für die aktuellen Bemühungen, den Frieden zu sichern, sondern auch für die vergangenen Jahre, in denen die Beziehungen zwischen dem Westen und Russland sich systematisch verschlechtert haben. Der Ausschluss Russlands aus der G8, die Einstellung der Treffen des NATO-Russlandsrates, die Einstellung der Treffen im Normandie-Format und die Nichtumsetzung des Minsker Abkommens sind Ausdruck eines beidseitigen Scheiterns der Diplomatie. Ein neuer kalter Krieg wurde über Europa gelegt, der droht, zu einem heißen Krieg zu werden. In einem bemerkenswerten Artikel, lieber Kollege Weber, hat ein bekanntes deutsches Nachrichtenmagazin in die Zeit zurückgeblickt, in der die westlichen Mächte mit der damaligen Sowjetunion kurz vor der Selbstauflösung des Ostblocks verhandelten. Und es hat detailliert dargestellt, dass etliche der Beteiligten der Sowjetunion mündliche Zusagen machten, dass sich die NATO keinen Zentimeter gen Osten ausdehnen würde. Wir kennen die Realität. 14 hauptsächlich mittel- und osteuropäische Länder sind seit 1990 der NATO beigetreten. Die geostrategische Architektur, da können Sie noch so dazwischen rufen, wie Sie wollen, der Welt hat sich in den letzten 30 Jahren geändert. Alle Seiten müssen an einer Friedensordnung arbeiten, die den multilateralen Charakter unserer Welt anerkennt, die auf internationalem Recht basiert und die legitimen Sicherheitsinteressen aller Akteure berücksichtigt. Nicht die NATO ist die internationale Ordnungsmacht. Diese Rolle kommt noch immer dem internationalen Recht und den Vereinten Nationen zu. Und ich hätte mich sehr gefreut, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, wenn das in dieser Debatte deutlich zum Ausdruck gekommen wäre. Die Beilegung der aktuellen Krise erfordert von allen Beteiligten die unbedingte Bereitschaft, den Frieden zu bewahren. Russland muss die Sicherheit seiner Nachbarn ebenso garantieren, wie die Ukraine aufgefordert ist, das Minsker Abkommen umzusetzen. Die absurde Idee einer weiteren Ostausdehnung der NATO trägt nicht zur Sicherheit, nachweislich nicht zur Sicherheit in Europa bei, sondern zur Destabilisierung. Frieden in Europa wird es nicht geben, sondern nur mit Russland geben, um auch Bezug zu nehmen auf die Verhandlungen des deutschen Bundeskanzlers gestern mit Wladimir Putin. Doch um ganz klar zu sein, ein Angriff Russlands auf die Ukraine wäre völkerrechtswidrig. Er würde langfristig russischen Interessen ebenso Schaden zufügen wie einer neuen europäischen Friedensordnung. Das muss die Regierung Putin wissen. Wir wissen aber aus bitterer Erfahrung, dass erfolgreiche Entspannungspolitik nicht auf den Behauptungen von Geheimdiensten basieren kann. Gerüchte sind bereits Teil der Eskalation und falls Sie das noch nicht gelernt haben, hören Sie mir einfach zu. Fakten sind die Basis des Friedens. Wir wissen auch, dass die US-amerikanischen Gasunternehmen in der Krise einen Boom erleben. Die Gewinne sprudeln und Investoren feiern auf Kosten der europäischen Sicherheit. Die Lehre, die es daraus zu ziehen gilt, ist, dass europäische Sicherheitsinteressen nicht zwangsläufig mit US-amerikanischen Interessen übereinstimmen. Europäische Interessen müssen hier von uns bestimmt werden, ohne transatlantischen Gehorsam. Und Frau Kommissionspräsidentin, europäische Energiesouveränität basiert weder auf russischem noch US-amerikanischem Gas, sondern auf dem schnellstmöglichen Ausbau der erneuerbaren Energien. Über Frieden in Europa muss in diesen in unseren europäischen Hauptstädten entschieden werden,
must be
nicht
decided
in
here in
Washington
European
oder im
capitals and not in
NATO-Hauptquartier.
Washington or in NATO HQ. Thank you very much.
I give the floor now to Andrea Boxkor on behalf of the non-attached members.
Köszönöm szépen, tisztelt elnök asszony! Az Európai Unió és tagországainak biztonsága szorosan összefügg Ukrajna biztonságával. Ukrajna fontos stratégiai partnere és közvetlen szomszédja az Európai Uniónak, ezért erős aggodalomra ad okot az ukrán-orosz határnál kialakult törékeny helyzet. Magyarország a feszültség feloldását a diplomáciai, tárgyalásos úton való rendezésben látja, ezért jégtörő szerepet vállal a párbeszéd megteremtése és a háború elkerülése érdekében. A békés megoldás az egyetlen helyes út, és a minszki megállapodások végrehajtásának nincs alternatívája. Kerülnünk kell a pánikkeltést, mely már hatalmas anyagi veszteségeket okozott, és a diplomaták menekítése sem egy jó üzenet. És minden olyan intézkedést is kerülnünk kell, amely kiélezheti a helyzetet. A konfliktusban már több ezer ember vesztette életét, belső menekültté váltak több millióan, és a munkanélküliség, a magas energiaárak, az infláció, a koronavírus járvány, ezek mind-mind nagy kihívások elé állították Ukrajnát, az ukrajnai lakosságot, és köztük a kárpátaljai magyarokat is. Ezért mindent meg kell tennünk a béke érdekében, és támogatnunk kell Ukrajnát, hogy gazdasági és politikai értelemben is egy stabil, demokratikus, életképes és független ország legyen. Köszönöm.
Danke. Frau Kollegin Juknovičiene Rasa ist unsere nächste Sprecherin.
Here's the next speaker.
Dear colleagues, happy to have European family heads and members together to express solidarity with the Ukrainian people that are like us and want to live like us in the same European family. The EU founding fathers have assumed their leadership to unite entire democratic Western Europe. Now it is the time for us to assume a similar leadership, to unite all democracies in the European continent. Because without strong Ukraine, there will be no strong Europe. The EU will be as strategically strong as will be able to become an important actor there. It is not the time for naive Chamberlains or illusions that relations with Putin's Kremlin can be mutually productive or that their concessions will help. It is important that the West remains united in solidarity, even if this escalation will end without military action. We must agree on what leading role the EU must play and what can it do to help Ukraine and other countries striving for EU membership. If Europe will return to business as usual with the Kremlin, we will be doomed to a cycle of hybrid and not only hybrid wars. Also, an intensive treatment for EU is necessary, including saving EU from cancer cells the Kremlin-controlled corrupt has. Already today, Putin deserves a tribunal for threatening to start a war to kill people, for Navalny, who is a symbol of poisoned and imprisoned Russia, and for whom I wish strength. I thank the Ukrainians and Slava Ukraini.
Danke, Frau Kollegin. Zu Wort gemeldet hat sich Herr Pedro Marques.
Mr. Marques.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Representative, Commissioner. A ameaça de invasão da Ucrânia trouxe à memória os dias sombrios da Guerra Fria. Os povos de ambos os lados a viver o medo de uma ameaça permanente. São tempos a que ninguém quer voltar. Bem, na verdade, quase ninguém. O Sr. Putin e alguns dos seus companheiros têm-nos mostrado as saudades que têm dessa época. Ao deslocar um enorme exército para a fronteira com a Ucrânia, para realizar os maiores exercícios militares do mundo desde há mais de 40 anos, o governo russo quis transmitir à Ucrânia, à Europa e ao mundo uma mensagem de intimidação e ameaça. Da parte da União Europeia,
from the European Union and with our transatlantic partners, the message has been heard, and we must be united. Only in that way will we be able to rise to this challenge. Our message is not a message of war, but just reminding Mr. Putin that a war will not be done in impunity. Our message is not one of threat, but we will not feel intimidated by Russia. Our message is for dialogue and for international law, diplomacy, and that through this we will avoid confrontation and resolve problems and find solutions. This is the way forward and the way in which the Parliament and the European Union is presenting to Russia for a solution with good sense and realism and with full respect for independence and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Now, Putin, we are sure he will make the right choice, and both for Ukraine, Europe, and for Russia. Thank you.
Danke. Ich bitte nun Herrn Abgeordneten Patras Astravicius zum Redner.
Mr. Chair, High Representative, Commissioner, dear colleagues. May this be clear to all. Ukraine is part of the European family, as Belarus too. Ukraine's security is Europe's security, and it's all of concern to all of us. The military threat posed by Russia to Ukraine only confirms the hopelessness and aggressiveness of the Kremlin. I very much hope that the West has seized the opportunity to learn the lesson of unity, solidarity, and common response. We will need this lesson in the future, because Putin seems to have neither the will nor the interest to change. By giving Ukraine the opportunity to reform on the basis of European experience and partnership, we are supporting and investing in the future of the democratic and prosperous Ukraine. We are enabling the country and its people to follow the path they embarked on back in 2014 with the Revolution of Dignity. Ukrainians decide their own future, and I'm strongly convinced that the future of Ukraine is not Finlandization, it's Europeization. Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
Danke, Frau Kollegin Viola von Kram und Taubadel. Sie sind unsere nächste Sprecherin.
Is the next speaker.
High Representative, war is so unjust and ugly that all who wage it must try to stifle the voice of conscience within themselves. These words belong to one of the greatest pacifists, Leo Tolstoy, who, ironically, also happens to be the one that President Putin claims to have influenced him most. Evidently, the Russian president has stifled his voice of conscience and brought our continent to the brink of war. How else could he summon 135,000 soldiers on the Ukrainian border? Ukraine is a great country of great people. Today it is stronger than ever. It stands up for itself and will only be stronger tomorrow. This is the reason of the Kremlin's war-mongering. Putin knows if he does not take over Ukraine now, he won't be able to do so in the future. What the Russian president sees as a window of opportunity can be a lethal trap for his country. Ukraine will be for Russia what Afghanistan was for the Soviet Union, an imperial overstretch, a painful end of Putin's empire. War is not only unjust and ugly, but also senseless, as there are no winners. It brings only destruction and suffering to people on both sides. If Putin starts the war, common Russians will have to suffer the consequences. Russian mothers crying over their fallen sons, pensioners feeling the chilling effects of Western sanctions. Ukrainians are strong because they fight for their country. They do not stand alone because they have reliable friends. And above all, because they have the truth on their side. Thank you.
Danke.
Thank you.
Ich erteile nun Herrn Jaak Madison das Wort.
Mr. Madison is the next speaker.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. Mr. Borrell, unfortunately, Mrs. von der Leyen has left already. I was listening very carefully to the speeches, and I would like to mention especially two things. First of all, Mrs. von der Leyen mentioned that Russia is now weaponizing the energy policy. Well, I would like to say, well, what we told you about 5-6 years ago. If we're going to build up the Nord Stream 2 between Germany and Russia, of course they will weaponize it. That's obvious. There is no energy policy without other policies, also with the economical policy, defense policy. That's very clear. But Germans wanted to build up the Nord Stream 2 with Russia, and here we are now. Of course they're weaponizing it. I think to make it as the big surprise, I think it's a bit ridiculous. Secondly, everybody has mentioned that we are ready for everything. Also Ms. von der Leyen and Mr. Borrell mentioned that we are ready for every scenario. Hopefully we are. But on the other hand, if you look at the facts, when Estonia just wanted to give some military help to Ukraine, who blocked it? German government. German government said, no, you will not give it. Because it was our military equipments on the 80s, on the Soviet time, part of the Eastern Germany. And we will not give it to Ukraine. So I really don't see this harmony inside of the EU. Of course, it's very, very clear fact that Russia is a threat. But I really don't think that we have to panic here. But we have to be ready for everything. That's also obvious. Also, like the previous speakers, when they tell that the war is senseless, it's pointless, of course. For us, it's pointless. But I think we take it too emotionally. We doesn't really think what really Russia wants to have. Even if you look at the troops, 135,000 troops next to the Ukrainian border, of course it's not enough to occupy all the Ukraine. It's not enough. Ukraine is a totally different country compared to what they were 8 years ago. They have made a really good progress on the right side. But 135,000 troops are very enough just to make some small actions in the eastern Ukraine. If you look what they are doing in the Russian parliament, they are now recognizing legally Donetsk and Luhansk as independent countries. It takes only a few days maybe when they're asking for the help, military help, because the Ukrainian government will maybe attack those independent countries. And this 135,000 troops are very enough for the small actions in the military. Thank you so much.
Danke.
Thank you.
Und das Wort hat Vizepräsident Zile Roberts.
Vice President Zile.
Mr. Chairman, High Representative, Ukraine today has the Day of Unity. What is it about? It's about the Ukrainian people wanting to take a path of Western democracy, and their democratically elected government and president are leading them. But the Ukrainian government needs our support through this Day of Unity, because it might be that the Kremlin believes that the Ukraine should be freed from junta, as it's sometimes said unofficially. And this is the moment when we have to lend a hand to Ukrainians, and our declarations should clearly state that the doors to the European Union are open for Ukraine. Of course, it's not happening very quickly, but still these doors have to be open, and we should provide not only financially, but including also support with some weapons. Well, then the question about not irritating or annoying Russia. The Ukrainian president had a chance to visit this house this week, but I believe that somehow our extended hand to Ukraine is shaking, which is not good news for the Ukrainian people. And let's be realistic, in the midterm we should change our energy policy, and very soon. Thank you.
Danke.
Thank you.
Der nächste Sprecher ist Herr Manu Pineda.
Mr. Pineda.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President.
Hemos estado muy cerca de que las dos mayores potencias nucleares entraran en
two major nuclear powers of the world entering into open conflict using Europe as a chessboard. And I speak in the past tense because the U.S. and its military arm NATO have run out of arguments for the wars that they would like to start, but they've never really needed them, have they? The U.S. continues to mount wars from very far away from its national territory, and many European governments have acted irresponsibly, pouring fuel on the fire. NATO is using Europe, and specifically its borders with Russia, as a huge military base at the service of commercial, military, and geostrategic interests that are not those of Europe. Mr. Borrell, we have many differences in opinion, but I still consider you a man of peace who seeks to resolve conflict through political means. So I ask you now to not allow the EU to become either the troops, the military base, or the chessboard for this war machine that is endangering the very existence of the planet. Thank you.
Danke, Herr Kollege. Wir schalten jetzt nach Athen zu unserem Kollegen Kostas Papadakis.
Go to Mr. Papadakis.
Ο ορατός κίνδυνος πολεμικής σύγκρουσης στα ρωσο-ουκρανικά σύνορα αφορά τον ανταγωνισμό για το μοίρασμα αγορών και επιρροής ανάμεσα σε Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες, ΝΑΤΟ, Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση και Ρωσία. Καμιά πλευρά όμως της υπερελιστικής σύγκρουσης δεν εκφράζει τα λαϊκά συμφέροντα. Πάει επίσης πολύ να υποδίεται η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση το περιστέρι της ειρήνης όταν έχει οδηγήσει σε πολέμους στο Αφγανιστάν, τη Λιβύη, τη Συρία και αλλού. Η ιδέα αμερικάνικη βάση στην Αλεξανδρούπολη, στη Βόρεια Ελλάδα, εξελίσσεται σε κέντρο προώθησης αμερικανο-νατοικών στρατευμάτων για την περικύκλωση της Ρωσίας και φέρει την υπογραφή της σημερινής και της προηγούμενης ελληνικής κυβέρνησης, εκθέοντας τον ελληνικό λαό σε μεγάλους κινδύνους. Η ανησυχία του λαού να μετατραπεί σε αυτοτελή αγώνα και να ξυλωθούν όλες οι ξένες βάσεις, να μην υπογραφεί η νέα ελληνοαμερικάνικη συμφωνία, να γυρίσουν τα στρατεύματα από το εξωτερικό, για απεμπλοκή από τα υπερελιστικά σχέδια ΗΠΑ, ΝΑΤΟ, Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, για να ανοίξει ο δρόμος της αποδέσμευσης από όλες τις υπερελιστικές ενώσεις με το λαό στην εξουσία.
Danke. Bei uns zu Wort gemeldet hat sich Herr Michael Gahler.
Mr. Gahler.
It has now been an 8-year period that the world has witnessed a systematic, multifaceted Russian policy of invading, destabilizing and demonizing Ukraine. The reason is not that Ukraine was a military threat to Russia or that Russian speakers were discriminated. Such claims are wrong. Nor should we buy the argument that NATO membership was such threat. We know it is not our weapons, but it is the power of the values and the attractiveness of democratic societies that pose an existential threat to a repressive Russian state structure behind whose Potemkin facade anything goes. Yesterday, Putin left all options on the table. In the press conference of the German Chancellor, he continued his obvious lie that a genocide was ongoing in the Donbass. His interpretation of history deprives Ukrainians of all features of statehood, claiming it was one people, one empire, one language, one church. No, Mr. Putin, it is not. Let us now be prudent, and with the implementation of the Minsk Accord, let us not exert undue pressure on Ukraine in order to appease Russian claims. They cannot hand out hundreds of thousands of passports to the citizens of Lugansk and Donetsk and claim the recognition of these Russian Bantustans, and at the same time demand from Ukraine to grant a special status to this region. Ukrainians must stand together against the external threat, but they need also to put their internal divisions aside. Now it is not the time for nitty-gritty partisan infighting. Join forces and implement the ambitious reform agenda that will make you one day an irresistible European country that enjoys all perspectives of a common future. We stand with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Danke, Herr Kollege.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd now like to hand the floor to Mr. Tonino Piccola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. High Representative, Mr. Commissioner.
Our relations with Russia have been at a low point for a while. Most political challenges at our external borders have directly or indirectly Russia as a common denominator. The list of open issues is long: disinformation, hybrid threats, funding of anti-democratic forces in the EU and foreign interference. But today our primary focus should be Ukraine. After 8-year war with 14,000 victims, the situation in and around Ukraine evolved into a global threat. Russia is also actively undermining Ukraine's democratic and socio-economic development for years through political and economic means, as well as through disinformation. So what can we best help Ukraine in this crisis? Despite the lack of progress, there is no alternative to continued talks. Diplomacy is still the only credible way to avoid doomsday scenarios. Meanwhile, the European Union has to continue supporting Ukraine, building deterrence, boosting Ukraine's economy and defence, supporting reform processes as well. We also should work to increase the potential cost of Russian aggressions by introducing sanctions against individuals, banks and companies involved in plans to attack Ukraine. Halting Nord Stream 2 in a case of aggression would increase our leverage while doing all of the above. Ukraine is a sovereign country with internationally recognised borders that has a full right to decide on its geopolitical orientation. The ongoing crisis has shown once again that any local crisis in Europe can turn into a global threat with possible deteriorating consequences. This should be an urgent call for the EU to enhance our own ability to respond quickly and in a unified way. While awaiting much-needed comprehensive EU strategy towards Russia, we stand with Ukraine. Thank you.
Danke vielmals. Nun ist Frau Nathalie Loiseau am Wort.
Mrs. Nathalie Loiseau has the floor now.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, cher Josep Borrell. L'Ukraine ne veut pas d'une guerre. L'Europe non plus, pas plus que les États-Unis. Et je suis profondément convaincue que le peuple russe lui aussi veut la paix. Pourtant, plus de 130